Chapter 8, The Answer. Once we found ourselves alone, I asked Anastasia, "What's all the big excitement about some kind of eagle?" Quote, "The eagle will be very much needed for our little one," she answered, "for our baby, Vladimir." "To play with?" Quote, "Yes, only play has a considerable significance for his future learning and feelings." I see. I said this even though I didn't fully understand this business of playing with a bird, not to mention an eagle. Quote, "But what were you doing with the cedar? Were you praying or talking with someone? What happened with you and the cedar, and why did great-grandfather seem so severe when he talked with you?" Quote, "Tell me, Vladimir, do you think there is, some kind of intelligence out there? Does there exist a mind in the universe, in the invisible world of the cosmic? What do you think?" Quote, "I think it's true. Even scholars talk about that, as do mediums, and it's mentioned in the Bible." Quote, "And this something, what would you say is the best word to describe it? I need to know this so that you and I can agree upon a definition. Say, for example, mind, intelligence, being, forces of light, vacuum, absolute, rhythm, spirit, God, unfathomable." "Well, let's say God." Quote, "All right then. Now tell me, does God attempt to communicate with man? What do you think? I do not mean by a voice from heaven, but through people, through the Bible, let us say, to offer a hint on how to be more happy?" Quote, "But the Bible was not necessarily dictated by God." Quote, "Well, by whom, then, would you say?" Quote, "People could have done that. People who wanted to invent religion. They sat down and wrote it collectively." Quote, "You think it's that simple? People just sat down and wrote a book and thought up narratives and laws? A book that has lasted for millennia and is the most popular and widely read book that has existed to date? Over the centuries, a whole multitude of other books have been written, but few of them can compare with the Bible. What does that mean to you?" Quote, "I don't know," I admitted. "Ancient books, of course, have been around for a long time, but most people today prefer contemporary literature, novels, detective stories, and all sorts of inferior stuff. Why is that so?" Quote, "Because reading them hardly requires any thinking. In reading the Bible, one is obliged to think at a faster pace, and there are many questions one must answer for oneself. Only then will it become clear. It unfolds itself, so to speak, into one's consciousness. If one looks upon the Bible merely as a statement of dogma, then reading and memorizing a few commandments is sufficient. But any dogma imposed from without and not grasped by one's inner being precludes taking advantage of the opportunities afforded man as creator." Quote, "What questions do we need to answer when we read the Bible?" Quote, "To begin with," replied Anastasia, "you might try to figure out why Pharaoh was unwilling to allow the children of Israel to leave Egypt." Quote, "Well, what's there to think about? The Israelites were slaves in Egypt. Who would want to let his slaves go? They worked hard and brought Pharaoh a good income." Quote, "The Bible says that more than once the Israelites brought a plague over the whole land of Egypt. They even killed people's firstborn offspring along with those of animals. Sorcerers were later burnt at the stake for such acts. But here, Pharaoh simply refused to let them go. Now answer the question, where did the Israelite slaves get enough goods and cattle to spend 40 years traveling? Where did they get their weapons to seize and destroy cities along their route? Quote, what do you mean where? Didn't God give them everything? Quote, do you think this was only God's doing? Then who? Man, Vladimir, has full freedom. He has the opportunity to make use of all the bright resources God gave him originally, but he can make use of other resources too. Man represents a union of opposites. See, Vladimir, how the sun shines. That is God's creation. It is for everyone, but for you and me, for the snakes, the grass, and the flowers. But bees use the flowers to get honey, while the spider's power is to draw poison. Each of them has its own function, and no bee and no spider can do otherwise. Only man has a wider scope. Only man can act in more than one way. One man can rejoice at the first rays of the sun, while another might curse. Man, you see, can be both a bee and a spider. Quote, does that mean God wasn't the only one helping the Israelites? How can you tell then what God actually did, as opposed to what was merely attributed to him? When something significant is created through man, Anastasia explained, there are always two opposites at work. Man exercises freedom of choice, which he will accept more of depends upon his purity and conscious awareness. Quote, well, all right, let's accept that. So you were attempting to talk with him when you were standing at the base of the cedar? Yes, I wanted him, capital H, to answer me. Quote, and great-grandfather objected? Quote, great-grandfather thought that I was speaking too irreverently, that I was too demanding. Quote, you really were demanding, I saw it. You were stamping your feet and pleading. What on earth did you want? Quote, I wanted to hear an answer. Quote, what sort of answer? You see, Vladimir, God's essence is not in the flesh. He cannot yell down to everyone from heaven telling them how to live. But he wants things to be fine and whole with everyone, and so he sends his sons, people into whose mind and soul he, capital H, has been able to break through, at least to some extent. His sons then go and talk with other people. They speak different languages, sometimes through words, sometimes with the help of music or pictures or various actions. Sometimes they are listened to, at other times they are persecuted and killed, like Jesus Christ, for example. And still, God is sending forth his sons. But as always, it is only some of the people who pause and listen to him, while others who are called do not get the message at all, and they violate the laws of a happy existence. Quote, I see. And that's why God will punish mankind by a global catastrophe, some kind of fearful judgment?